My name is Stella Pereira. I am 36 years old, divorced, and I own a small home restoration business in Portland, Oregon. My work keeps me busy enough that I rarely have time to think about the mistakes I made in the past. I like order, schedules, and predictable routines because they make life feel manageable. I have lived in the same quiet neighborhood for almost 8 years. The streets are lined with old maple trees. The houses sit close enough that neighbors recognize each other's cars, and nothing unusual ever seems to happen. My younger sister, Nina, has always been the complete opposite of me. She moves through life on instinct, while I plan everything in advance. We grew up in the same house, shared the same parents, and experienced the same childhood, but somehow became completely different adults. Our relationship had been distant for years. We spoke on birthdays, major holidays, and whenever one of us absolutely had to. We never officially stopped loving each other, but trust slowly disappeared after too many disagreements that neither of us ever tried to fix. Nina has 2 children. Emma is 10 years old. She is quiet, observant, and notices details that most adults overlook. Her younger brother, Caleb, is 7. He talks constantly, laughs easily, and usually fills every room with energy. Even though I was not deeply involved in their daily lives, I cared about them more than I ever admitted. Whenever we met during family gatherings, they ran toward me without hesitation, and for a few hours it almost felt like our family had never drifted apart. The last time I spoke to Nina was 12 days earlier. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. She sounded distracted. When I asked if everything was all right, she answered with the same sentence she always used whenever she wanted to end a conversation. "I'm just busy, Stella. I'll call you later." She never did. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now I wish I had listened more carefully to the silence between her words. The morning everything changed began long before sunrise. My alarm had not gone off yet. Outside, the neighborhood was still covered in darkness. Only a few porch lights glowed across the street, and the air carried the cool silence that exists before the first commuters leave for work. Then my doorbell rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Whoever stood outside wasn't pressing the button politely. They were holding it down over and over again. I sat upright in bed. For a moment I considered ignoring it. Maybe someone had the wrong address. Then the bell rang again. This time it was followed by 3 loud knocks. My heart started beating faster. Almost nobody visited my house without calling first. I grabbed my robe, slipped on my shoes, and walked downstairs. As I reached the front door, I looked through the peephole. No one was standing there. I frowned. The porch looked empty. I unlocked the deadbolt anyway and slowly opened the door. My breath caught instantly. 2 children sat quietly against the wall beside my front porch. Emma looked exhausted. Caleb was asleep with his head resting against his sister's shoulder. Next to them were 2 backpacks, a folded blanket, and a small paper bag containing snacks that had barely been touched. Emma slowly looked up at me. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply whispered my name. "Aunt Stella." Every thought disappeared from my mind. I dropped to my knees beside them. "What happened?" She didn't answer. Instead, she pointed toward one of the backpacks. A folded piece of paper rested on top. My name had been written across the front. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was only one sentence. "Stella, don't try to find me. Keep them hidden. I'll be back when it's safe." I read it again. And again. The handwriting looked exactly like Nina's. But something about the message felt wrong. Too short. Too cold. Too final. Nina would never leave without explaining herself. Not to me. And certainly not to her children. I looked around the street. No parked cars. No one walking away. No sound except distant birds beginning to wake with the sunrise. Whoever had left Emma and Caleb here had disappeared without leaving a trace. I helped both children inside. The house suddenly felt unfamiliar. The silence that had always comforted me now felt heavy. As I prepared hot chocolate and searched for blankets, I kept staring at that note lying on my kitchen table. The words never changed. But with every minute that passed, they became harder to believe. The first thing I did after Emma and Caleb fell asleep on my couch was call Nina. Her phone went straight to voicemail. I called again, then again. Nothing changed. By 7 o'clock that morning, I had already contacted every hospital within driving distance. I told myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe she'd been in an accident. Maybe her phone had been stolen. Maybe someone else had left the children at my house without her knowledge. Every possibility sounded more believable than the note sitting on my kitchen table. None of the hospitals had a patient named Nina Pereira. I called our parents next. They hadn't heard from her in nearly 3 weeks. That answer made my stomach tighten. 3 weeks? Nina usually checked in with them every Sunday evening, no matter how busy she claimed to be. My mother sounded worried, but I lied. I told her Nina had simply dropped the kids off unexpectedly because of a work emergency. I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth. Not yet. When Emma finally woke up, she looked around the living room as though she expected someone to walk through the front door. Instead, she found me making pancakes. She quietly sat at the kitchen island. Caleb joined us a few minutes later, rubbing his eyes and asking if his mother had called. I forced a smile. Not yet. He nodded without saying anything else. For a 7-year-old, that silence felt unnatural. Children usually ask questions. They complain. They cry. Caleb simply accepted the answer. It was as if he had already expected it. While they ate breakfast, I noticed something I had missed earlier. Both children were wearing identical smartwatches. Expensive ones. The screens were black. I picked up Emma's wrist gently. The battery died? She immediately pulled her hand back. No. Then why doesn't it turn on? She looked toward her brother before answering. Mom took the batteries out. That made no sense. Modern smartwatches didn't even have removable batteries. I turned the watch over. Someone had carefully removed the back cover using professional tools. The internal battery was gone. The same thing had been done to Caleb's watch. Who would dismantle 2 children's watches? And why? I tried asking more questions. When did Mom do that? Emma hesitated. I don't think she did. I looked up. What do you mean? She lowered her voice. The lady did. What lady? Emma stopped talking. Her eyes drifted toward the front window. The one with the white gloves. A chill ran through me. Who is she? Emma shook her head. I don't know. Before I could ask another question, Caleb interrupted. She smiles all the time. Neither child said another word. That afternoon I drove to Nina's apartment. The parking lot was nearly empty. Her car was gone. I climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor and knocked several times. No answer. Just as I reached for my phone, the apartment manager stepped into the hallway. You looking for Nina? Yes. He sighed. She moved out. I stared at him. When? About a week ago. Moved where? He shrugged. Didn't leave a forwarding address. She has 2 kids. I know. They're with me. His expression changed immediately. What? I explained as little as possible. He frowned, clearly confused. That's strange. What is? The movers weren't family. I felt my heartbeat quicken. What do you mean? There were 4 people. They packed everything fast. They wore matching black jackets. I thought they worked for some relocation company. Did Nina supervise them? He thought for a moment. I only saw her once. When? They walked her out. My chest tightened. Walked her out. He nodded slowly. I remember because it looked odd. She wasn't carrying anything. And she never spoke. What do you mean she never spoke? They kept answering every question for her. I stood frozen. Did she look upset? I couldn't really tell. But he paused. It almost looked like she wanted to say something. I drove straight home. The entire trip, one thought kept repeating in my head. Someone else had emptied my sister's apartment. Not her. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed fresh tire tracks near the curb. A black SUV was parked halfway down the street. The windows were tinted too dark to see inside. As soon as my car slowed, the SUV quietly pulled away. I watched it disappear around the corner. Inside the house, Emma was standing behind the living room curtain. She hadn't even greeted me. She was watching the street. Without taking her eyes off the window, She whispered something that made every hair on my arms stand up. They found this house too. That night, I barely slept. Every small sound outside made me reach for my phone. The image of the black SUV stayed in my mind long after it disappeared from the street. Around 3 in the morning, I walked downstairs to check the locks one more time. Everything was secure. As I turned toward the living room, I noticed Emma sitting quietly by the window. She wasn't crying. She wasn't scared. She was simply watching the empty street. "You should be asleep," I whispered. She looked at me. "I don't like sleeping at night anymore." "Why?" "Because that's when people come." My stomach tightened. "What people?" She hesitated. "The people Mom didn't want us to talk to." Before I could ask another question, she looked away. I promised. The next morning, I decided to stop guessing. If Nina wasn't answering her phone, I needed to understand what had been happening in her life before she disappeared. I drove to the accounting firm where she had worked for nearly 4 years. The receptionist greeted me politely. "I'm sorry," she said after checking the employee records. "Nina resigned." "When?" "About 2 months ago." I frowned. She never told me. The receptionist lowered her voice. "Actually, she didn't exactly resign." "What do you mean?" "Our records say she accepted another position." "Where?" "I'm afraid I can't disclose that." I thanked her anyway and walked back toward my car. Just as I reached the parking lot, a man in his early 40s approached me. He wore a maintenance uniform and carried a toolbox. "Are you Stella Pereira?" I froze. "Who are you?" "My name is Daniel Brooks. I used to work in IT here." He glanced around before speaking again. "I knew your sister. Every instinct told me to be careful." "What about her?" "She asked me for help a few months ago." "Help with what?" He looked uneasy. "Recovering deleted files." I stared at him. "Deleted by who?" "I don't know. But she believed someone inside her new workplace had been accessing her computer remotely." My pulse quickened. "Did she tell you where she worked?" Daniel nodded. She had joined the Mercer Children's Foundation. The name sounded familiar. Then I remembered. Evelyn Mercer. The woman who appeared on magazine covers every year. The billionaire philanthropist everyone admired. Her foundation raised millions for disadvantaged children across the country. I had seen interviews praising her generosity countless times. "What was Nina investigating?" I asked. Daniel looked directly into my eyes. "I don't think she told me everything. But she kept saying the numbers didn't make sense." "What numbers?" "The donation records." He reached into his toolbox and pulled out a small flash drive. "She asked me to keep this if anything happened." I stared at it. "Why didn't you go to the police?" "I tried calling her several times." No answer. I assumed she'd changed her mind. He handed me the drive. "I think it belongs to you now." Back home, I waited until Emma and Caleb were busy watching television before inserting the flash drive into my laptop. The folder contained hundreds of spreadsheets, donation reports, financial statements, grant approvals. At first, everything looked perfectly normal. Then I noticed something strange. The same children's names appeared repeatedly in different states. The same birthdays. The same identification numbers. Entire lists had been duplicated. The foundation claimed to be helping thousands of children. According to these records, many of those children didn't actually exist. I kept scrolling. More inconsistencies appeared. Money entered one account. Hours later, it disappeared into another company with a completely different name. Then another. And another. It looked less like charity. It looked like someone was moving money through a maze. Suddenly, my laptop screen went black. I frowned. The power hadn't gone out. A message appeared in white letters. "Stop looking." My hands froze over the keyboard. The message vanished almost immediately. The computer restarted by itself. Every file on the flash drive was gone. I searched every folder. Nothing. Someone had remotely erased everything. A loud crash came from the garage. I jumped to my feet and ran outside. The side door was wide open. Boxes had been thrown across the floor. Tools were scattered everywhere. At first, nothing seemed to be missing. Then I noticed an old storage container lying upside down. It was where I had kept one of Nina's forgotten belongings after helping her move years earlier. The container was empty. Whoever broke into my garage hadn't come for money. They hadn't come for jewelry. They had known exactly what they were looking for. As I stood there trying to understand what had just happened, my phone vibrated. The caller ID showed an unknown number. I answered immediately. No one spoke. For several seconds, I heard only slow breathing. Then a calm woman's voice finally broke the silence. "Tell the children to stop talking about the woman with the white gloves." The call ended before I could say a single word. I lowered the phone slowly. Only 4 people knew Emma had mentioned those white gloves.
Me, Emma,
Caleb, and whoever had been listening. I didn't tell Emma or Caleb about the phone call. There was no point in frightening them even more. Instead, I installed new security cameras around the house the very next morning. I also replaced every lock, added motion lights near the garage, and asked my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Lawson, to let me know if she noticed unfamiliar cars driving through the neighborhood. She agreed immediately. "I've seen that black SUV twice this week," she admitted. That confirmed I hadn't imagined it. Someone really was watching my house. Later that afternoon, Daniel called. "I recovered something. I thought everything was erased." "So did I. But your sister was smarter than whoever deleted those files." Within an hour, I met him at his small computer repair shop across town. The place was crowded with old monitors, cables, and shelves filled with dismantled electronics. Daniel connected one of his computers to a secure offline system. I found hidden fragments. What kind of fragments? Images. He opened the first file. It looked like an ordinary photograph from a charity fundraising event. Evelyn Mercer stood in the center, smiling beside several donors. Nothing unusual. Then Daniel zoomed into the background. Near one of the service doors stood Nina. She wasn't attending the event. She was secretly photographing stacks of financial boxes being loaded into an unmarked delivery truck. The timestamp caught my attention. The truck had arrived after midnight, long after the charity event had officially ended. "That's strange," I whispered. Daniel nodded. "It gets stranger." He opened another recovered image. This one showed the truck arriving at a warehouse on the edge of the city instead of the charity headquarters. "No children's supplies," Daniel said quietly. "No food. No medical equipment. Just boxes filled with financial records." My pulse quickened. So, the foundation was hiding something. "I think your sister knew exactly what it was." Before either of us could continue, someone knocked on the front door of the shop. Daniel looked through the security monitor. No customer appointment. The man outside wore a business suit. He smiled politely while holding a leather folder. Daniel didn't open the door. Instead, he watched silently. After nearly a minute, the man slid an envelope underneath the door before walking away. We waited until his car disappeared. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper. There were no signatures. No company logo. Only one sentence. "Family secrets should stay inside the family." Daniel looked at me. "That's not a random threat."
No.
"They know who I am." As I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that every step forward was making someone desperate. When I arrived, Emma was sitting at the dining table drawing with colored pencils. Normally, she filled pages with animals or cartoon characters. Today, she was drawing a building. A very large building. Rows of windows. A fountain in front. And standing beside the entrance, a woman wearing white gloves. I slowly sat beside her. "Emma, is this the place where your mom worked?" She nodded. "I went there once." "You did? It was family day." She pointed toward the drawing. "That's the lady. The one with the white gloves?" "Yes." "What did she do?" Emma's expression changed. "She told me not to tell Mommy about the basement." I felt my entire body go still. The basement. Emma nodded. "Mom got angry after we left. I heard them arguing." "What were they arguing about?" "I don't know. But Mom kept saying." Emma stopped. Her small hands tightened around the colored pencil. She kept saying that children weren't numbers. The room became completely silent. That sentence didn't sound like a family argument. It sounded like someone confronting a financial crime. I immediately called Daniel. An hour later, he searched public property records connected to the Mercer Children's Foundation. Only one location listed a restricted underground storage level, an old training center outside the city. Officially, it had been closed for renovations nearly a year earlier. Unofficially, utility records showed electricity usage every single night. Someone was still working inside that building. Before we could decide what to do next, Daniel's computer chimed. A new email had arrived. There was no sender's name, no subject line, only a short video attachment. Daniel opened it. The footage lasted less than 20 seconds. It showed Nina. She was alive. She looked frightened, tired, and much thinner than I remembered. She stared directly into the camera, without speaking. Then someone off-screen ordered her to stand up. The video ended immediately. A final line appeared against a black screen. Stop searching, or the next video will be your last memory of her. I watched the video at least 20 times. Every single frame. Every tiny movement. Nina never spoke, but something about her expression bothered me. She wasn't looking into the camera. She was looking slightly above it. Daniel replayed the footage again. Pause it there. The image froze.
He zoomed in.
There. I leaned closer. What am I looking at? The reflection. I hadn't noticed it before. A polished metal cabinet behind Nina reflected part of the room. The reflection revealed someone standing just outside the camera's view. Not a security guard. Not a masked kidnapper. A woman. She was wearing white gloves. For the first time, we finally knew the mysterious woman wasn't just part of Emma's imagination. She was real. Daniel enhanced another section of the reflection. A logo appeared on one of the cabinets. It belonged to a medical supply company. After a quick search, we discovered only 3 buildings owned by the Mercer Children's Foundation had purchased equipment from that supplier during the past 2 years. One of them was the abandoned training center, the same one Emma had unknowingly identified. I called the police. I explained everything. The threats, the break-in, the video, the missing children listed in the charity records. The officer listened carefully before answering. We'll document your report. Document. Not investigate. Not search. Not act. Just document. After hanging up, Daniel looked at me. They don't have enough evidence. Then we'll get it. The following evening, we drove toward the abandoned training center. We stayed far enough away that no one could see our car. The building looked exactly as Emma had drawn it. Large. Silent. Surrounded by high fencing. Officially abandoned. Unofficially alive. Lights glowed through several upper windows despite the property supposedly being closed. Delivery vans arrived one after another. None carried charity logos. Around midnight, another vehicle entered through the rear gate. A luxury sedan. Daniel lifted his camera. I think that's Evelyn Mercer. Even from a distance, I recognized her. The same elegant hairstyle. The same perfectly tailored clothing. The same white gloves. She disappeared inside the building. We waited. Almost 40 minutes later, an employee pushed several locked storage carts toward a loading dock. Instead of food or supplies, the carts were filled with thick boxes, marked confidential, financial records. Daniel photographed everything. License plates, employee faces, vehicle registrations, every possible detail. Then something unexpected happened. A side door opened. A woman rushed outside wearing a dark hooded jacket. She ran toward the tree line. 3 security guards chased after her. I grabbed Daniel's arm. That's her. Nina? I know the way she runs. Without thinking, I jumped out of the car. Stella. Daniel shouted behind me. I ignored him. I sprinted toward the woods. The guards were gaining on her. Nina. She turned. For one brief second our eyes met. It really was my sister. She looked shocked to see me. No, she yelled. Go back. One of the guards tackled her before I could reach them. Another guard grabbed my arm. I fought back as hard as I could. Then headlights flooded the entire property. Dozens of vehicles surrounded the entrance. Federal agents. Marked SUVs. Unmarked trucks. Officers poured through every gate at once. Someone shouted through a loudspeaker. Federal agents. Nobody move. The guards released us instantly. People began running in every direction. Daniel stood near the road, holding his phone high. He looked at me and yelled over the chaos. I sent everything. What? The photos. To who? An investigative journalist. I stared at him. You what? They've been working with federal financial investigators for months. The raid hadn't started because of luck. It had started because Daniel had quietly shared every piece of evidence we collected with someone who already had an active investigation. Within minutes, officers escorted Evelyn Mercer out of the building. She remained calm. She smiled for the cameras. She even waved politely. As she passed us, she stopped for only a second. She looked directly at me. You still don't understand. Then she continued walking. I rushed toward Nina. She hugged me so tightly that neither of us spoke for nearly a full minute. When she finally stepped back, tears filled her eyes. I never abandoned my children. I looked at her in confusion. What do you mean? She reached into her jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It looked almost identical to the note left on my doorstep. Except this one was different. My real note. I unfolded it carefully. The handwriting matched perfectly. It read, Stella, if anything happens to me, trust no one from the Foundation. I'm bringing the children to you myself. I looked back at Nina. She shook her head. I never made it to your house. They intercepted me. They took the kids. And someone else delivered the fake note. Everything I had believed since that first morning suddenly collapsed. My sister had never abandoned her children. Someone had carefully made sure I believed she had. The federal raid didn't end in one night. It continued for days. The training center was only the surface. Once investigators secured the building, they uncovered additional underground sections that were not on any official blueprint. The deeper levels were not storage rooms. They were operational spaces, places where financial records were processed, identities were rewritten, and donation flows were continuously redirected through shell networks. Evelyn Mercer was taken into federal custody the same night, but she never acted like someone who had lost. During questioning, she remained calm, almost detached, as if the entire situation was an inconvenience rather than a collapse of her life's work. She never denied what the investigators found. She only corrected their terminology. Misclassified assets, she said once. Not fraud. That sentence alone told me everything about how she saw the world. Nina was brought to a medical unit for evaluation. The children were safely recovered the next morning from a separate facility 2 states away. Emma and Caleb had been placed under constant supervision, but they were alive, unharmed, and together. When I finally saw them again, Emma didn't run toward me immediately. She just stared. Then she quietly said, "You found us wrong at first." I didn't know how to answer that, because she was right. A week later, Nina told her full statement to federal investigators. I was allowed to sit with her afterward. She looked exhausted, but her voice was steady. It wasn't just Evelyn, she said. There were lawyers, accountants, and officials who knew exactly what was happening. They didn't steal money randomly. They built a system where no one could trace where it ended.
She paused.
And when I started seeing the pattern, I became a problem. I asked her about the note, the one left on my doorstep. Her expression changed immediately. That wasn't mine. I was trying to reach you the night everything collapsed. I never made it out of the city. She looked down at her hands. They used my identity while I was being held for questioning. They needed you to believe I had disappeared willingly. So, you wouldn't look for me in the right place. The truth hit harder than anything else. The entire story I had lived through, every fear, every assumption, every decision, had been shaped by a lie designed to isolate the children and remove me from the search. Daniel later confirmed something even more disturbing. The black SUV I kept seeing was part of a private security contractor hired through a subsidiary linked to Evelyn's financial network. Not law enforcement. Not official protection. Private containment. 3 days after Evelyn's arrest, additional whistleblowers came forward. One of them confirmed what Nina had suspected all along. The children's charity had been used as a financial cover for years, but the deeper operation was even worse. It created layers of legal and financial identities that allowed powerful donors to hide transactions without direct association. Children's records were used as placeholders in databases to mask movement patterns. That was why Nina's report about children who didn't exist mattered so much. It wasn't a glitch. It was structure. One evening, I sat outside the house while Emma and Caleb played inside for the first time without fear. Daniel joined me on the porch. "You realize something, right?" he said. "What?" "This wasn't just about your sister." I nodded slowly. It never was. He looked at the street. The system only broke because one person refused to stop looking. I didn't respond immediately, because I knew what that meant. If Nina hadn't gathered the evidence, if Daniel hadn't recovered the fragments, if Emma hadn't mentioned what she saw, if I had stopped at that first message, none of this would have ended the way it did. Later that night, Nina sat with me in the kitchen. The house felt different now. Quieter, but no longer heavy. She watched Emma and Caleb sleeping in the next room. "They'll need time," she said. "They'll get it," I replied. She looked at me for a long moment. "I'm sorry I brought this to your door." I shook my head. "You didn't." Then I told her the truth. I had finally understood. It was already at the door. You just made it visible. A few months later, Evelyn Mercer's trial began. It was not quiet. It was not hidden. It was public, detailed, and documented across every channel. Her network collapsed piece by piece as more evidence surfaced. She was ultimately convicted on multiple federal charges related to financial fraud, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. The sentencing was severe. But what stood out most wasn't the prison term. It was the permanent dismantling of everything she built. The foundation name was removed from every registry. Every associated entity was dissolved. Every asset was seized. And every record tied to her influence was permanently marked as criminal history. There was no legacy left to protect. Only consequences. On the day of sentencing, I watched the broadcast with Nina. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She only said, "That's not justice. That's exposure." And she was right. Justice would have meant it never happened. Months later, life became something close to normal again. Emma started school again without fear. Caleb stopped asking where his mother was every morning. Nina slowly rebuilt her life, not as someone running from a shadow, but as someone who finally stepped out of it. As for me, I stopped checking locks 3 times before bed. Not because I forgot, but because I no longer had to. And sometimes, late at night, I still think about that first morning.
The porch.
The silence. The 2 children. And the note that started everything. Because the scariest part was never what was written on it. It was how easily I believed it.